Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New View podcast. My name is Mac.
And my name is Megan.
Come along with us as we dive into the world of competitive Irish dancing and beyond.
Sharing perspectives, developing community, and learning from each other.
We hope you enjoy. Welcome, everybody, back to another episode of New View. Megan and I are so thrilled to announce today's guest. We've had this conversation in the works for a little while, and honestly, just couldn't be more excited to introduce to you Emily Stewart. Emily was a competitive dancer in her own right with tons of competitive success back in the day. I know I looked up to Emily quite a lot growing up. I looked up to that age group, and Emily and I both did a good old Davis at 76, so I feel like we're sisters in that way.
Yeah.
But since then, Emily has gone on to acquire so much education in movement and Pilates and that whole area of things. And she's now also a registered dietitian. And we are just so thrilled to have her on today to talk all about fueling and all of the different needs of dancers and get into some really, really important topics that I think Megan and I both think competitive dancers need to hear more about. So thanks so much for joining us, Emily.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. Excited to chat.
Yeah. So we thought just to start off, could you tell us a little bit about your background in dancing, first of all?
Yeah, absolutely. I began dancing when I was 5 years old in Southern California, where I grew up. I got into it kind of randomly. I saw a performance of it at the local elementary school talent show and was very mesmerized and told my mom I want to do that. And so she signed me up for classes shortly after that. And I remember from the beginning being very serious about it. I've always been a perfectionist and quite hard on myself. So just even from that age, being very serious about making sure I was getting my steps and would get frustrated or upset with myself if I wasn't. So I think that sense of perfectionism was kind of there from day one. But I danced all throughout childhood, and at around the age of 13, my dance teacher hired in a workshop teacher from Boston named Attracta, and I really clicked with her. Something that I always struggled with was confidence. And she helped me to really tap into that self-belief and kind of said, like, look, the only thing standing in your way is you. And if you work hard and you believe in yourself, you can really do anything you want or achieve anything you want. And so that was like really a life changer for me. And fast forward to the end of high school, I feel like you're always faced with that decision of if you're going to continue to compete in college and what that's going to look like. And for me, I knew that I wanted to continue. And really, the dream was to be able to move to Boston and go to college there so that I could be a student in a Attracta school. And I'm lucky enough that that's what ended up happening. And my parents were supportive of that decision. I moved to Boston. Attracta and her family really took me in and became like a second family to me. And I danced very competitively all through those 4 years of undergrad and experienced quite a bit of success. But I think what stands out for me the most was the journey of it all. I know you guys talk a lot about that on here, but really thinking about the growth that I experienced, not just as a dancer, but as a person, and all of the life lessons that you learn along the way and that really stick with you. And I feel like whatever challenge comes up in life, I can handle it because of dancing. So just really grateful for, all of the ups, the downs, everything in between, and how dancing has shaped me as a person.
That's amazing. I love that. And yes, we do. That is a theme that absolutely does come up a lot, is kind of like the process and the journey and all of that. And it's really cool to see, again, kind of a little bit of a topic or I guess theme that's been coming up in doing these episodes is getting to chat with all these incredible people who've grown up in dancing, but then, like you said, are translating those skills and those aspects of themselves that they developed in dancing to, the next chapters of their life, which is just like so cool and inspiring. And I didn't know that about you, that you moved to Boston to dance with Attracta. That's really cool. That's such a cool aspect of your story. And I imagine that would have been like a little bit scary, a little bit of a leap of faith, but probably so exciting at the time.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely was. It was, something I really wanted to do, and at the same time, it did feel quite scary. It was my first time leaving home, and there was a lot that went into that, right? Like that transition. I remember missing home a lot at first, but then eventually, just really through a lot of the support that I had, it's funny because I really ended up loving my life in Boston. And I think there was a certain point where my parents were sort of like, okay, yeah, she's probably not coming back. And that's what ended up happening.
Wow. Crazy where life takes you.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, to pivot then a little bit, speaking of like where life takes you, how has your career as a registered dietitian come to be?
Yeah. So I ended up going back to school to become a dietitian in my mid-20s. I studied something kind of unrelated, business in undergrad. So I sort of had to start over. But the reason I wanted to pursue becoming a dietitian was really inspired by my own journey with disordered eating and underfueling and REDS, which I'm happy to get into a little later. But basically, at the height of my dancing career, I was experiencing a lot of body image distress, a lot of, just trying to control my shape and my size, a preoccupation with food, and just really not understanding how much food I needed to fuel the activity that I was doing. As you know, Irish dancing is super demanding physically. And so for me, that showed up in a couple of different ways. I lost my period. I experienced quite a bit of anxiety, low mood, rigidity around food, and just really an immense fear of gaining weight or body changes in general. So to kind of sum it up, my relationship with food, body, and movement was quite complex. And to kind of add to that complexity was how, I kind of thought that that's what it took to be at the top. Like that was kind of necessary to be competing at an elite level. And I also, I think, kind of convinced myself that it wasn't that bad because I didn't really fit the sort of stereotypical image that I held in my mind of what an eating disorder is. So it was
Mhm.
kind of a way of being able to like minimize it a little bit. And I think that's something that happens often is kind of this sense of feeling like it's not that bad, or you're like not the quote in the eating disorder world, it's like quote sick enough.
Mm.
Eventually, I started working with a therapist specialized in eating disorders. I also retired from competition and dancing to prioritize my health and well-being. And so it was just a lot of, over time, kind of untangling these maladaptive thoughts and kind of getting to the bottom of where those were coming from. And I think for me, my recovery was also very solidified by the training that I did for dietetics. Um, I pursued specialized training in eating disorders because I knew that I wanted to eventually help people who kind of have been going through similar struggles. It's just something that resonated with me. And through that training, you get the nutrition science side of things, you get the psychology behind eating, which is so fascinating. And you also are essentially a role model for patients. You're doing things like therapeutic meal support where you're eating side by side with somebody. And so it really just kind of helped me see, like, you sort of have to go through your own work and your own healing in order to be able to help somebody else. And so that's what ended up happening for me. And yeah, again, just so thankful for the journey because it led me to where I am now. And I'm just so passionate about what I do, and being able to help individuals cultivate a healthier relationship with food is a big aspect of what I do. And I just find it so rewarding and fulfilling.
Emily, I mean, all of what you said is so interesting. I want to like get into all the little aspects, but For me, it kind of struck a chord in that I think what you experience is, first of all, not uncommon at all in dancing, especially as you outlined kind of as we started our conversation, like that perfectionistic trait.
Yeah.
And Mac and I both know as people studying sport and performance psychology, like that can be good in some ways, but it really does get you into a lot of trouble per se.
Yeah.
It can be great for, drilling your heart out and really perfecting your steps, but pretty problematic in a lot of other ways and can kind of, create issues in so many different areas, whether it's like competition anxiety, uh, body dysmorphic issues and eating issues and things like that. But I think that's an important conversation to have. Like we almost really idolize people who have that perfectionistic tendency, and we're like, oh, you have to be a perfectionist, to be in the top five, to win the worlds, all of that. And I think, well, not even I think, I know I've been guilty of that too, thinking like, oh, I really need to hone my like perfectionistic thinking in order to be good and successful. And to hear you say like that you kind of come out the other side of that, I think is powerful for not only myself, but other dancers too, who are kind of in the thick of that. And maybe it's taking over their life or it's becoming unhealthy. And to say that you can be successful and, find your purpose in life independent of those like perfectionistic tendencies, I think is a powerful note as we kind of maybe engage in some deeper conversations to come. I anticipate in this conversation, just because things like body dysmorphia and eating issues are tougher things to talk about, especially for dancers. I think it's really important to set the tone of like, you can come out the other side and you're a great role model too for knowing that, you can be successful beyond dancing and these struggles and issues. So I just thought that was important to bring up
Oh,
before we
thank
go any
you.
further.
Thank you. And I think too, like along the line of what you were saying, these traits like say perfectionism, they're not inherently bad, right? Like they have led us, to many wonderful things. And I think it's more so a conversation of like when those types of traits are like left unchecked, when things get taken to the extreme, then that's kind of maybe where some things get a little bit, just like out of balance, out of check. So yeah, I think everything has like pros and cons, right? So just making sure that we can kind of keep it in that state of balance.
I'm
Totally.
wondering too, because um I guess I only know from Irish dance experience, of course. I've not really done other sports or art forms and things, but we tend to really like praise people who have those perfectionistic tendencies, who are super good at like committing their whole life or being extremely rigid, and I can say I'm guilty of all of that. And I I lived off of those compliments, to my perfectionism. I was like, "Oh, that's awesome. Like people are noticing this," even to the point where it became like you were saying kind of unhealthy or not the best approach to things, but then it in turn just fueled that to continue going. And I think that's unintentionally where we've kind of gotten in the dance world, at least. Like we see the best dancers having these tendencies, and then we praise, those kind of coming up on the scene for having similar traits and things, and whether intentional or not, we can um be creating some pretty big long lasting problems. So I think too, and we can get into this, but how to like, work with the next generation and dancers who are finding themselves naturally kind of having those tendencies, and how they can have a healthier approach and work on it before it becomes potentially a life threatening or altering significant problem. So we can save that for a little bit, but there's so many interesting points. I feel like we could talk forever.
Absolutely. Yeah, tools in the toolbox for sure.
Totally. Um, Emily, you mentioned reds, I think. It's a term, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure that everybody's familiar with the term REDS. I'm somewhat, but I think if you could give us a little bit of a rundown of what that is and maybe what to look out for in that topic, that'd be super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So REDS is an acronym and it stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport. And it occurs when there is a prolonged state of low energy availability. And low energy availability is really just this mismatch between the amount of energy that you're consuming through food and the amount of energy that you're expending through your training, leaving you in a state of like an energy deficit. So, where there's not enough energy to cover the cost of both training and then just the body's normal functions of daily life. And this energy imbalance, it can occur intentionally, so just through calorie restriction, disordered eating, potential eating disorder, but it can also happen unintentionally, where it might just be that there's a knowledge gap and somebody just might not be aware of how much energy they really do need to be fueling the activity that they're doing. Um, and our bodies are very smart and very adaptive. So when there is this energy imbalance going on, our bodies are really adept at conserving energy. It's kind of like the analogy that I use a lot is like our phones. When our phone the battery starts to decrease throughout the day, right? We'll get a notification at some point that we're in low power mode where, certain apps are just like not going to be functioning. And that's essentially what happens in the body as well. So, kind of like a whole host of systems are just like sort of down regulated. And there's, a bunch of different physical and psychological symptoms that can negatively affect both health and performance. And some of those things are things such as increased injury and illness, excessive fatigue and low energy levels, missing periods or irregular periods, um, mental health issues, digestive issues, sleep disturbances, loss of joy in sport, a longer time it takes you to recover from training. The list goes on. But the good news is that REDS is completely reversible. So, through energy restoration and through nutritional rehabilitation, essentially just eating more and eating enough and giving your body the rest that it needs, your body is able to get into a state of energy balance where it's able to sustain both training and performance, and then more importantly, health and well-being.
Mm. So important to talk about because I think, like you said, it probably can come about in different ways, whether it's kind of intentional sort of restriction and getting a mismatch that way, or it's just some people just, don't naturally get as hungry or whatever, but they're still doing all this working out and whatever, so they maybe need to think about their nutrition in a different way. But regardless of, how it comes about, that list of things that you were going through of how, it can really, I love that analogy. It's like your body is turning off apps, basically.
Yeah.
That it needs to be running in order for you to A, just be functioning well as a human body, and then B, performing as an elite athlete, right? It's like all of those negative things you were listing off. It's like, well, in my mind, I'm going like, well, that's not going to help your treble jig. That's not going to help your reel. That's not going to help you do 3 rounds at a fesh, right? And we all know doing those 3 rounds at a fesh is already hard enough, let alone with
Yeah.
anything else on top of that. And so I do think it can almost be sometimes like almost I don't know if ironic is the word, but it's almost like you have this sort of restrictive or very perfectionistic or whatever mentality around first it starts out in your dancing and then that can maybe bleed into other areas of your life. And the intention behind that often is like, I want to be the best dancer that I can be. But then the irony comes in where it's like, well, actually, you can take that to such an extreme that now it's a detriment to you being the best dancer you can be. Um, you know, I'm also curious too, is there a relationship between reds and like bone health and injury, like that
Yes.
type of thing as well?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that was something I didn't mention. But yeah, especially when there, are menstrual cycle disturbances, that really downregulates your hormones. And so when estrogen isn't being produced, that has a real negative impact on our bone health. So experiencing bone stress injuries can be something that happens. And then also just like later in life, if this isn't fixed or treated, osteopenia, osteoporosis, that sort of thing. So yeah, bone health is a huge part of it. Again, one of those like body systems that gets impacted.
Yeah, for sure. I'll be honest. So, osteoporosis, all that sort of stuff kind of runs in my family already. And so, um, just I really do identify with like quite a lot of these things is just, growing up as a competitive dancer, it can be quite easy to um, weave these webs in your head of how you feel like you need to show up for your training and whatever. And it was brought up to me at some point that, like, oh, I'm already at a predisposition for osteoporosis and this kind of thing. So it's like, ooh, some of these things and ways I'm going about my training might even be making that even worse down the road. And so I think it can be hard for dancers, and I'm wondering if you guys can speak to this a little bit too. It's like being able to zoom out a little bit because sometimes when you're in that phase of your life where everything is geared towards some sort of dancing goal or whatever it might be, as commendable and wonderful as that is, um, sort of being able to zoom out and think about your whole existence as a human and your longevity and all that kind of thing. I don't know how important that is, and to acknowledge like that can be really hard to do as well when you are locked into to those goals and that kind of thing. I don't know if you guys can speak to that as well with your own experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think, we don't really, it's like at what cost, right? Like if we don't have our health, then, like that our health is the most important thing. And like you said, trying to zoom out, but that can be really hard for somebody who's so in it, right? Like I know I probably didn't care a whole lot about like osteoporosis that's going to develop way later at whatever age, like 18, 19. Like that just didn't land at the time. It was like so like what I'm doing right now. But I think through um I think for like athletes and dancers really coming to the conversation from like that performance aspect of like, if these things continue, your performance is really going to suffer. And even if that's not the case right now, because I know I work with a lot of people who, they actually, their performance is going really well. I know I kind of fell into that where like I was experiencing like a lot of improvement and things felt great. But you're fine until you're not fine.
Mm.
And the longer that this goes on and isn't addressed, then things can really start to unravel. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think I totally agree with what you're saying.
Emily, I think what you just said is so important. Like you're fine until you're not fine, especially, when you're in the thick of like climbing the Irish dance ladder and you're so close to achieving that ultimate goal or whatever. It's like I don't care if I'm causing all these problems. Like you're so like your tunnel vision is going crazy. You
Yeah.
cannot
Yeah.
see any other issues. And I'll just be upfront. Like I've had exactly the experience you're describing and kind of explain for yourself where you're like, oh, I'm so locked into pursuing my goals and being the very best I can. And I'm actually seeing like some performance, like some positive performance impacts because, issues like that can before they become bad, they can produce, some positive outcomes. And I think we cling to those more than we'd be interested in considering like potential issues down the road. I know in the pursuit of like winning the world championships, there was no way you could get me to think about my health as like a 50-year-old woman. I'd be like, who cares? Like, I don't care at all. Like, what happens? Like, I just need to like achieve my goals, which sounds now as a retired dancer, um, kind of terrible to even say. And not something I want for the dancers that I work with. I would hate for them to be in that position. So I think, just having these conversations is powerful too for other kids to hear and be like, oh, it is important to consider my whole life and my health long term. While I am in the thick of pursuing what is my dream right now, there will be a time when it's important to consider, if I want to have a family, if I want to just protect my long-term health in all of these ways so that I can be around to like fully be alive and enjoy my life. So I just think it's such a complex topic. And there's so many ways to go about having the conversation, but I would hope that, what we're doing today is at least beginning to kind of weave some more positive webs for dancers and things, just because it is a prominent issue. And I know we keep saying that, but I think more people struggle than we probably realize, especially because the conversation is difficult to have. Um, and I don't know if you can speak to that at all, but I think, when we're around girls of a similar age to us, whatever age we are, the conversation is not necessarily going to turn to discussing mental health or struggles we're having. It's kind of about like, oh, what are you doing to like optimize your training, or like, are you doing some potentially unhealthy things that I might want to adapt to or like start doing so that I can be good like you? And I think a lot of that stems from the way we are just social learners to begin with. And we watch videos on Instagram, and like I might see a video of Mac and be like, oh, I want to dance like that. Like, how do I get myself to do that? And I'm not an expert, so I'm just going to take anything that pops into my mind, which can then lead to some very unhealthy problems. I'm just wondering if you could speak to that at all. Like, how I personally believe that Irish dance is a pretty social thing, a lot of social learning is involved. How can that be both positive and negative to our experience and just general health?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you kind of brought up like the comparison factor. I think that's just really like human nature, right? We're just going to kind of do that, even though maybe we know we shouldn't. But I think that, it's so complex, right? Like genetics play a factor, just like our temperament, our environments, kind of that social piece that you were talking about, Megan, and then just like our biology as well. So there's not just one thing that's going to kind of like pull that trigger, right? It's like these types of issues are so like multifaceted. So it's very hard to like narrow it down to one specific thing. I know for me, like I was in a super supportive environment. And even then, like I still struggled with these things. So yeah, I think it's really just like trying to kind of untangle and like be aware. I guess awareness is like the first part of like, okay, am I having these thoughts that are then like impacting my behaviors? Like, am I starting to change things around like, how much I'm eating or exercising or even engaging with friends, right? Like, am I starting to become a little more self-isolated? All of those sorts of things. And really just trying to ask for help when you need it or be open to it as well. So I think that's another thing too, is like approaching somebody. I know we were talking about this, Mac, of like how to navigate that of if you are concerned about somebody, but like in a very gentle, disarming way, in a one-on-one setting, just saying like, hey, I noticed that, you're not really yourself these days. Like, is there anything going on? And just seeing, if that kind of opens the door.
Totally. I mean, yeah, I think this, as you're saying, Emily, it is such a complex thing, and there are so many factors. I do think that the nature of competitive Irish dancing being an aesthetic sport and it being, somewhat based on how you just look, that definitely plays into it. And to speak to what Megan was saying, it is this social learned thing, and these beliefs are, they kind of do get passed down from generation to generation. And so I really do believe that I'm really grateful to people like you, Emily, who've, decided to commit your career to working on this issue and helping dancers with it. But I think I guess just speak from my own perspective quickly is like I am doing sports psych work, but more as like a mental performance consultant. So like actually working on clinical issues like serious eating disorders is not in my scope of practice. That's not something that I would actually touch myself. Um, but where I see I can make a difference is like, okay, how do I help to change the narrative around the way we talk about these things and the way we model behaviors. And, I think it's just so complex and it's not an easy issue, but I'm glad we're having this conversation because I think the more we can kind of attend to the more, I guess, environmental aspects of how these issues come to be and just kind of the behaviors that end up being reinforced, kind of what Megan was touching on, I think that can be a hugely beneficial thing, as well as people just simply seeking out the help that they need one-on-one or whatever that might be too. But yeah, I don't know, it's so complex. We could
It
probably talk
is.
forever.
Yeah, totally. And I'll just say too, like, because you brought up, how it's an aesthetic sport, which it is, but I think there's many aspects to Irish dancing that are actually quite protective. Like, when we think about our art form compared to like something like ballet, right? Like in just the costumes, like what we wear, we're covered up a lot more than say like a leotard, that sort of thing. And you also have to be like to kind of get through like your steps and to get through a whole thing, like you have to be so strong. I think there's also a lot more kind of diversity in the way that bodies look in Irish dancing, which are just like such great things. And so yeah, I think what you were saying, Mac, around like creating that environment where we can like celebrate those things,
Totally.
is just yeah, such a good way to approach it.
Yeah, and really celebrating that strength component. I totally
Yeah.
agree with you. Celebrating being strong and being able to execute these difficult things.
Yeah.
Yes, of course, there's an aesthetic component to that, but like, what does a strong version of that look like? A strong and a healthy version of that. I think that's a really, really cool thing to kind of almost wrap that subject on. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, to just kind of hopefully bring some really useful information into this as well. We're curious if you can kind of even walk us through some, I know everybody's different too, but walk us through some general guidelines for competitive dancers in terms of fueling themselves for training and like fueling themselves on dance days, that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the first place to start is making sure that in your daily life, that you're eating on regular intervals or at regular intervals throughout the day. So you're never leaving more than 3 to 4 hours between eating opportunities. So for most people, that's going to look like 3 meals a day and then snacks in between. And the next key thing from there is just ensuring that at those meals and snacks that you're eating, that you are getting enough, that those meals and snacks are adequate and that they're meeting your nutritional needs, which, as you said, Mac, is going to look different for everybody. But really focusing on that regularity and adequacy is kind of like that baseline. And then from there, thinking about like balance and variety, right? So we want to make sure that we're getting a variety of different foods to get a variety of different nutrients in our diet. And I think, when it comes to like dancers and athletes, unfortunately, the nutrient that I find is so underconsumed is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates get a lot of hate, a lot of villainization, and it's unfortunate because carbs really are your body's your brain's preferred source of energy and the most efficient source of energy. So I always say carbs are your friend. We need carbs, and when it comes to sort of like the ratio of like carbs to protein to fat, we need over half of our intake if we're talking about like dancers and athletes, over half of your daily intake should be from carbohydrates. So I know like protein, for instance, gets all the hype and,
Yeah.
the health halo. But we actually need more carbohydrates than we do protein. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily realize. So when it comes to fueling your performance, carbohydrates are the biggest thing. And then from there, I would say the next kind of piece of the conversation is talking about timing, so nutrient timing. And so when it comes to, say, like dance class or even competition day, we can just maybe use class as an example. You want to be thinking about like sandwiching your class with nutrition. So you're thinking about what you're doing before, what you're doing during, and then afterwards. So for beforehand, you really want to be focusing on carbohydrates, specifically simple carbohydrates, which are the ones that are going to be most quickly digested and absorbed. So those are things like your white breads, your white pastas, white rice, some cereals, even like honey, maple syrup, those types of foods. And those are going to sit really easy in your stomach. So the closer you get to dancing, those are the things that you want to be leaning towards. If you have, say a few hours, like 3 to 4 hours before you're dancing, of course, you can eat like more of a meal that's balanced and has some protein and has some fat. But speaking of like right before, it's those quick digesting carbohydrates. So some good examples, like we also want to think about how you're usually on the go and you've got to kind of pack these things in your bag. So things like pretzels, dried fruit, let's see, like even fruit chews, gummy candy, dried fruit, those sorts of things are going to be really good options for fueling your dancing. And then for during, it really depends on, the length of your class. Like if you're dancing for multiple hours at a time, then you're going to really need to be consuming something during that time as well. And I think, a little bit of a complexity is like usually your appetite is impacted a little bit. You might not be feeling hungry during that time, but that doesn't mean that you don't need anything. We just know that exercise is like a natural appetite suppressant. So I always say like it's trial and error. You got to find what works for you. But can you try to eat like a couple of bites of a granola bar, or can you eat some pretzels? A sports drink is a really great option because if it's uncomfortable to eat something and you really don't want to do that, then it's generally more tolerable to drink something. And in that sports drink, you have your carbohydrates, which we need, and then you also have like that hydration factor, and then the electrolytes as well. So if you're sweating a lot, it's just a really good option. And then afterwards, so when it comes to recovery nutrition, I usually ask my clients like what they know about recovery nutrition before we get into it. And everybody's so quick to say protein, which is absolutely true. We do need protein, but carbohydrate as well. So that carbohydrate is going to replenish your energy stores that you just depleted in your dancing. The protein is responsible for that muscle repair and recovery, but it helps to have carbohydrate present in order to make that process happen. So protein and carb afterwards. Um, and I think as far as competition day goes, really nothing changes in that regard, but there's a few more things to think about. I think one being nerves and, how you're feeling on that day, because that can usually affect your appetite or your digestion in some way. So I think, really trying to simulate that day as much as you can and practice and think about ahead of time, what is your breakfast going to be? Like if you have to be on stage super early, what are you going to eat that morning? And what time are you going to have to get up to give yourself enough time to eat that breakfast? If you dance later in the day, what are your meals and snacks going to look like before that time? I think having a plan and being prepared is so, so important. And then the last thing I'll say too for competition day is to just not do anything different, right? Like when it comes to the food that you're eating, stick to what you know, stick to what's familiar and comfortable, and just try not to add anything.
For sure.
I think that is, sorry, Meg.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that's so helpful because a lot of people, and myself included at times, have been, whether it's for class or a competition, um, either kind of like ritualistic around what they're eating and being super kind of like, oh, I can only eat this like one thing, but maybe that's not necessarily giving you what you need to kind of get through what your demands are, or just generally speaking, they're like, oh, I can't eat before dance or I can't eat during dance because it upsets my stomach or whatever the reasoning is. And then we wonder why we're out of energy after 10 minutes, and can't make it through a dance class or through a full dance. And we, for whatever reason, do not seem to call upon our nutrition for being the reasoning. We're like, oh, we're not working hard enough. Like that's why we're tired or something, instead of being like, no, I actually need to eat something or at
Oh,
minimum, drink, have a sports drink or something to get me through. And we're confused as to why we're not making it through a 6-hour workshop day on empty, when what you outlined is so important. And hearing you talk about it again now as being a retired dancer, I'm like, well, of course, yeah, that totally makes sense.
Makes
But
sense.
like
Yeah.
we've talked about, when you're so in it, especially when you're in that like competitive environment, it just doesn't really cross your mind a lot of the time, or it does, and you can shove it out of your mind pretty quickly by being like, oh, well, like I'm not going to change things up, or like other people aren't doing this, so I'm not going to do it. But it's so important. And I think I don't want to minimize the work it takes to get to a good place with that, but some of the things we can do are fairly straightforward in terms of providing ourselves with like some simple fueling to get through what we need to. And I think just what you outlined will be super helpful for a lot of people, myself included, even just as like a casual runner now.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's again like tools in the toolbox, right? But I think what you were saying about like the digestion, it's the gut is a muscle. So because I hear that a lot of like, oh, that's not going to agree with me, or like I can't do that, that sort of thing. But if you practice and if you try different things, your body will get used to it. Like it will get used to having that fuel. And even though maybe when you start like having those bites of a granola bar might feel uncomfortable. Like the more that you do that and find what works for you, like your body is going to be able to get accustomed to that and really use it as fuel.
totally. I was gonna say, I know this can maybe almost be to a detriment, but I love, this is going to make sense in a second. I love my morning breakfast routine. Like it is I just, like I wake up in the morning and I am so excited for my oatmeal. Like I just, that's my jam and whatever. And I was definitely one of those dancers that like earlier on I was like, "Oh, my stomach is so upset. Like I don't want to eat anything." And it was always like a fight with my parents because they were like, "You need to eat something. Like how do you expect you're going to get through your rounds if." And now I see that too as a teacher, and it's frustrating because it's like, I know you can do a better treble jig than that, but you're like kind of starting off behind because you're not even eating anything. So of course you're going to feel lightheaded. Anyways, um, but I in my normal day-to-day life, not my fesh world life, I got really into my routine of my breakfast, like my and I it's like it's my way I get going in the day, it's my routine and maybe to a fault sometimes, but I do think that became helpful later in my dancing career when like that morning routine of like getting up, having my oatmeal, like that was the first thing I do. I just translated that to a dance day. So I tried to just make that normal, like, and that normal thing of my regular daily life was just what was supportive of my dance mornings anyways. And so that became a really good thing. It was like, okay, I can at least get like, I know I'm gonna get one really good meal in to start because that's just part of my habit. And like you said, it's a muscle. Like I literally do that every day. So it wasn't weird to or hard to do it on a fesh morning. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, I mean, ideally you pick something that's like easy enough to do in a hotel room or whatever as well, because
Yeah,
sometimes
yeah. Right.
But
Those are the factors that go into it too. It's like you're not in the comfort of your home on dance day.
yeah.
You're usually, in a different city or just like away from home. And so I think that's where like the planning and preparation can be really beneficial. But yeah, like you said, it's that familiarity. Like you knew that that was something that you loved on a daily basis and sat well. So it's like whatever happens on dance day, like even if there's nerves present, you can still have that same breakfast because you've done it a million times already.
Yeah. And like so weird, it almost became like a comfort rather than, oh, I have to like get this oatmeal down. I was like, oh, this is like my normal thing. And it actually reassured me and made me feel just more like normal and grounded on a dance day, which is just interesting. Also, side note, I was really happy to hear you say the white bread because again, in my last couple of competitive years, even though I was like already 28, 29, my mommy still made my dance sandwiches for me. And I always have like a white bread peanut butter sandwich, usually
Yeah,
between
it's brain
like,
fuel. That's
yeah,
such a good option.
usually between soft shoe and set. I guess it would depend on the timing of the day, but like that was another little like milestone in the day that I always like looked forward to.
I
Um,
love it.
so I don't know. I think that can be useful too, is like finding the things that, are in line with those really great guidelines that you were telling us, Emily, but making them something that are really comforting and exciting for you and like just nice that it's like, oh, I actually am looking forward to having that on my dance day or whatever it might be. So I think those
Yeah,
guidelines are really useful. And thank you for sharing about the hard carbohydrates because I definitely, the protein thing is so huge right now and that's something I learned today. I didn't know that how important that was too. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. I think that's so awesome.
absolutely.
Yeah, this conversation has been incredible. Probably could use a take two. But thank you so, so, so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge and all these helpful tips for dancers. I think it's going to be so beneficial, and it's just been so great having you.
Thank you so much for having me. So fun.
Thanks for joining us in this episode of the New View podcast. We hope you enjoyed.
If you have any ideas about future guests we should interview or want to connect, you can find us on Instagram at newview.collective or email us at newviewcollective.mm@gmail.com.